The thing about being in the middle on so many issues that we have in this country is that you can agree with somebody on one point and then completely disagree on another. And what I'm getting at here with this specific video is that I totally agree with the idea that we need to be removing people from this country who aren't supposed to be here. We should be actively pursuing criminals. And while I agree with this idea that we shouldn't be going after people who are here illegally and not bothering anybody, if you happen to get caught doing something that you're not supposed to be doing, or if you just happen to get stopped by police and they have a legitimate reason to identify who you are and they find out that you're illegal, then you should be deported. I mean, we have laws here. They need to be enforced. I don't agree with wasting resources going out trying to find every single one of them. But yes, let's go actively seek out the criminals, stop criminal behavior, get them out of here. And if you happen to get caught here illegally, then I'm sorry, you go. Like, regardless of whether you're violent or not, you're not supposed to be here. You did something that caught our attention, and hey, sorry, you got to go. Now, that's where I agree with channels like this one, where yes, we do need to enforce the laws, and if you want to come into the country, you need to do it the right way. But on the other hand, I disagree with the idea that the safety of our law enforcement is so paramount that they need to walk around with masks on. Here's my issue. Number one, if you're going to choose to wear a uniform, you are automatically marking yourself out as a potential threat to criminals and a potential threat to a lot of different things. But there is a hierarchy of what's right and what's wrong, and the hierarchy of knowing who our law enforcement is and having confidence in the fact that they are legitimate law enforcement and not people just pretending to be law enforcement is, I'm sorry, it is more important that we have transparency in our law enforcement than individual officers have safety from the job that they've chosen to do. I know that sounds insane to some of you. I get it. I totally understand the idea that human life is the most important thing, and we should be, people should be able to do whatever they need to do to protect themselves and all of that. I understand, and to some extent, I agree. But here's a problem. If you can't identify the people who are able to exert authority over you, then you as a citizen no longer have any kind of power at all. And then before all of this masked ICE raid stuff, we had issues with people impersonating law enforcement officers already. Now, if legitimate law enforcement officers are walking around and covering their faces and hiding who they are, it makes it so much easier for people to do that too. One of the safeguards that at least reduces, has the potential to prevent the kinds of corruption in our government and law enforcement is that you know who it is that's doing it to you. And if we allow our law enforcement professionals to hide who they are because they're afraid of being doxxed or whatever, like, I understand that's a legitimate concern. I'm not trying to minimize it as a concern. But at the same time, there's a list of priorities, and knowing who our law enforcement is, at least to anybody who values freedom and the principles that our country is founded upon, the transparency is far more important than the safety of the officers. I know that for some people that's going to be really hard to even hear, much less at least understand where I'm coming from. I'm not saying that I want law enforcement to be put in unnecessary danger. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying I don't care about law enforcement. I think that law enforcement, for the most part, is filled with a lot of people who have good intentions and they want to protect their community. But the potential abuse that comes from uniformed officials being able to hide who they are is a far greater danger to our community and to our country than the danger that individual law enforcement professionals might experience as a result of performing their duties. I know that this is one of those things where there's going to be a lot of people who just disagree with where I'm coming from. And like I said in many episodes, you can have a logical argument for a point, and it makes logical sense depending on where you start from. And I start from the position that authority over people is something that should be very carefully monitored and guarded against and minimized as much as possible, because as soon as you start giving authority to people, they want to start controlling what you do. because that's just the human nature. We all have this desire to just like make the world in the image that we see it, and everyone else just needs to do what we say and everything will be great. Everything will be great. Everybody, and that always comes from a place of wanting to do good, of wanting to make the world better, because you think that your way of doing things is going to fix all the problems. But what you don't understand is that with billions of people on this planet, your vision of the world, that your vision of utopia is another person's vision of hell. And the moment you start imposing your idea of the world on other people, you are harming them in ways you can't even understand. And the only way that we can prevent one group of people from trying to control everything and implement their vision of utopia or the world or whatever it is that they want is to make sure that we know who they are, what powers that they have, and have measures in place that limit their ability to enforce their ideology on us. When you have uniformed authorities, actual authorities walking around with masks on, making it impossible for anybody to identify them and verify that, oh yes, this is a police officer, you make it way easier for actual, counterfeit police officers to walk around doing things like I heard the other day where, the news reported that a fake officer detained a woman and raped her in his car because he looked like a police officer. While I agree that the safety of our officers is important, I do not agree with the idea that their safety is more important than, the transparency that comes with knowing who the law enforcement officer is. And that means you have to be able to see their faces so that the other law enforcement officers around can see their faces and verify that they are who they're supposed to be. And so that if something happens, you've seen their face and you can identify them later if you need to press criminal charges against them because either A, they did something outside of the rules that they're supposed to be following as law enforcement officers, or B, it wasn't a law enforcement officer in the first place, but you know what they look like and you can pick them out of a lineup. I know that there are some people who just can't hear that. You think that safety is the most important thing and that's just it. I'm sorry, but, freedom has a cost, and that means that some people have to die for it. And, I don't want to die for it. You don't want to die for it. They don't want to die for it. But sometimes that's the price we have to pay for the freedoms that we say we want. And too many people have gotten to the point where they're not willing to risk that potential consequence. So that's what I wanted to say. I agree with the principle of what ICE is doing. I disagree with the methods that they're choosing to do it. If you want to do raids on criminals, that's fine. Leave everyone else alone. Let regular law enforcement identify those people and, ideally get them out of here. They can hand them off to you and all of that. When you're doing your raids, you need to show your face. We need to see who you are. We need to know who you are so that it's much harder for criminals to impersonate you, and so that if one of you do things you're not supposed to do, we can identify who you are. Because that is part of the process, and that is part of the protections that we're supposed to have. We are supposed to be able to confront our accusers, and it's impossible to do that if we don't know who you are. That's the way the rules are, and that's the way it should be. This idea that law enforcement gets to walk around with masks on is just antithetical to the idea of holding our law enforcement and our officials accountable. You need to be able to know who they are. And that's just the way that it is. I know it sucks for law enforcement. I know it's going to make it harder for law enforcement to do their jobs, but that's the job. And it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard for the law enforcement to do what they're supposed to do so that they can't just grab people and do whatever. The advantage is supposed to be on the side of the accused, not the government. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So that's what I wanted to say. Hit the like button, subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you for the next one.